We're in the penultimate section of our journey through the story of Joseph, 6 of 7. So if you're joining us today as a guest, you're jumping in at the deep end, almost the deepest end. But if kind of you think, oh, I want to catch up on what's been said, or if you think, gosh, I really don't know much about the ins and outs of the story of Joseph, then all the sermons are available on our YouTube channel. Quick plug. So just head over there, St. Matthew's Walsall YouTube channel. I think that'll get you there. You search that, you'll find it. It's got a blue logo. And you can watch all of the series, the past previous 5. Okay, we're in the penultimate, 6 of 7. And it's been, even for those of us who've been here every week, it's been a couple of months since we began. So I'll give us a little recap, and I promise I'll try and keep this brief, which isn't my strong suit. Jacob, also known as Israel. If that was confusing you in the passage, Jacob and Israel, the same person. He has 12 sons, and his favorite is the second youngest, Joseph. Jacob really lets the whole family know that Joseph is his favorite, and Joseph also lets them know that he is the favorite by telling them about all of his dreams in which he is ruler over all of them. Bad move. And the jealous and irritated brothers then sell Joseph into slavery, and they tell Jacob, Israel, the dad, that Joseph is dead, killed by a wild animal. Obviously, Jacob, very upset about this. Turns out that Joseph does quite well in Egypt until he's thrown into prison for something that he didn't actually do. And then the whole dream thing starts to find its place as Joseph discovers that he's actually quite good at analyzing and making sense of people's dreams. He interprets them. And that gains him quite a reputation, up to the point that Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, needs a dream interpreting. It's causing him lots of trouble, and he needs to know exactly what it means. Joseph does a great job and reveals that a famine is coming. And he also reveals how Egypt can avoid or survive through the famine. Pharaoh is super impressed, and eventually Joseph becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man, second in charge in the whole of Egypt. The famine strikes, and it impacts everybody, but it particularly impacts Joseph's family, the ones who have sold him into slavery, and they have no choice but to travel to Egypt looking for help. And who do they find? Well, it's Joseph. And Joseph agrees to help them. And then there's this whole big reveal that Joseph is who he is, and the family is brought back together. It's very lovely. And that's it in a nutshell. Now, in today's passage, we see the whole family up sticks, and they move to the area surrounding Egypt, the best bit of Egypt, the land of Ramesses. And we get to be a fly on the wall for the moment where Jacob, Israel, is reunited with Joseph, his favorite son, who he's been grieving for decades. And in this beautiful moment, there's this one line that Jacob says that kind of encapsulates the whole thing. And Jacob says, "Now I am ready to die, since I've seen for myself that you're still alive." Essentially, he says everything in his life has come to completion. He's full of joy and he's full of peace. But to really grasp the importance of this moment, I think that we need to dig a little bit deeper, as is always the case with the Bible. We need to remember who this person, Jacob, actually is. If we want this to move from being an admittedly very joyful moment within a family story to being a story that rightly echoes through the eons and impacts us today, then we need to peel back a few layers and get to the heart of this event. All of the families that we see in Genesis are a big mess. They're all trying to do things their own way. They all get jealous of people in the family. They all fall out. They all do really horrible and heinous things to one another. And none of them truly reconcile with one another in the end. None of them really get back together in the end. There's not a lot of forgiveness, and there's not a lot of love, not much love between them. In fact, it's even worse because these people were supposed to demonstrate the goodness of God to the world. They've been blessed by God in order to be a blessing to other people, to the whole world. But instead, they're leaving a legacy of division, of wounds, of jealousy, and of hatred. One of these people is Jacob. His family history is absolutely full of drama. And so is his father, who you will have heard of as well, Isaac, and his grandfather, whose name will ring a bell, Abraham. Their stories are full of drama as well. And these are people who God has blessed that they might be a blessing to the world, but they consistently abuse their position. They consistently do things in their own way, through their own power, the way that they want to do it. And God keeps reinstating that blessing. He keeps blessing them again and again, only for them to fall back on their usual habits of deceit and jealousy and hatred. Jacob's name even means the deceiver, the one who deceives. So Jacob's family, they're quite wealthy. They've done all right for themselves. And they have this family story that they've been blessed so that they can bless others. Jacob is the younger of two brothers. The older is Esau. This, again, is probably a story that you know and recognize. You might remember the story. Esau is the older brother, although only by a couple of minutes, but he has the birthright in his family. So when Isaac dies, Esau will be head of the family and will inherit all of the wealth and all of the responsibility. Jacob is jealous, and he tricks his elderly father, Isaac, into giving him the blessing instead of Esau. And this obviously leads to arguments, threats of violence, and ultimately the family becomes divided, as you might expect. They all go their separate ways. And many years later, Jacob and Esau arrange to meet up, but Jacob thinks that Esau is going to kill him. But when the two are reunited, Esau isn't angry. He's filled with love for his brother Jacob and his family, and they embrace and they share these kind words together, even though Jacob has done awful things to him. It says, "But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept." Sounds an awful lot like that line where Jacob is reunited with Joseph. Even so, Jacob didn't fully trust the love of his brother in this situation. How can he have forgiven me in such a loving way after all of the awful things that I've done? And Jacob never fully accepted the forgiveness and the love of his brother. In fact, he goes on and he deceives his brother one last time as he says that he will follow them and they will live together. But instead, he goes off in a different direction and does things in his own way once again. And the two don't meet again until their father Isaac dies. You see there's a pattern unfolding here. Now, among Jacob's sons, there is jealousy, there is hatred, there is violence, there is division. But when they're reunited, there is love and joy. You may remember earlier in the story how Joseph gave the brothers back all of their money for the grain that he'd given them to survive through the famine. That was before they even knew who he was, before they'd apologized. And how Joseph was overcome with emotion at the sight of his brother Benjamin. He had to leave and to let out all of his tears and emotion because they didn't yet know that Joseph was who he was. There is joy and there's love for one another. You might call it reconciliation. There's reconciliation. Joseph, who had every right really to send his brothers away to die in a famine, has compassion on them. They don't even need to apologize, and he has compassion on them. So when Jacob finally lays eyes on his son Joseph, he not only sees a person he thought that he'd lost long ago, he sees the end of these cycles of jealousy and hatred and violence and division. He sees true forgiveness. He sees love. He sees grace. He sees his sons achieve what he never managed to do with his brother and his family: reconciliation. And they all live together in and around Egypt for the rest of their days. Where before Jacob couldn't bring himself to trust the love and forgiveness of his brother, here he and his family fully embrace the grace of his son. And through that, they are free to live the rest of their lives as a blessing to the people around them. We heard towards the end of the Genesis reading, Jacob, not once but twice, blesses Pharaoh. That's a big deal. It marks a progression as God's people grow in faith and understanding of what it is to be children of God. It's to forgive and to accept forgiveness. It's to love and to receive love. It's to know the blessing of God and to bless those that we meet. It's to know our acceptance and to offer acceptance to everyone who is searching. It's to forgive as we know that we've been forgiven. That's what it is to be a child of God. And that forgiveness that we receive is more than just God saying, you know what, forget about all that. It's even more than God paying off our debts, which I think is quite a common idea of what forgiveness is. It's more than that. The forgiveness that we all receive is so dramatic, in fact, that they had to come up with a new word just to try and encapsulate the idea of it. And that word is atonement. It might be a word that you know, a word that you've encountered before. And it sounds fancy, but actually, it's a really simple word. Atonement, it simply describes a state of being at one with God, which I now understand isn't that simple of a concept. But the word itself is very simple. Atonement, at one-ment. We are at one with God. Nothing separates us because we are at one. And this is illustrated in the story of Joseph, where he and his family are reunited. They are at one. The events of the past no longer need to separate them. They are one family once again, and they will live together in love and unity as God's people. They are at one. We are at one with God. But though that is, I think, the key message of our Christian faith, it often gets overshadowed by some deep misconceptions about the nature of God and the nature of forgiveness. Within Christian talk, we often place more weight on our failings than on the grace of God. How can our failings possibly be bigger than the grace of God? We often focus so keenly on the lofty ideals of perfection that we fail to see the goodness of God in our lives, and we can fail to see our own growth as disciples of Christ. And we can be deceived into thinking that we are beyond redemption. The amount of people that I speak to who are absolutely crippled by feelings of unworthiness. The amount of people that I know who are afraid of both the judgment of God and the judgment of their Christian brothers and sisters. The amount of people I know who carry around this burden of shame because they've been told either explicitly or more subtly that they are terrible sinners beyond redemption. I find it shocking and saddening. And so it's not surprising that people find it hard to accept the love and the forgiveness of God. That people, just like Jacob with Esau, have that elated experience, but then don't feel as though they can entirely trust it because they view themselves with shame. But when Jacob sees Joseph, he knows the full extent of his love and his acceptance for him and his brothers. Joseph has demonstrated his forgiveness and his acceptance, and they embrace each other as a united family. Joseph forgave his brothers before they even asked, before they even knew who he was. He forgave them, and they were reunited in love at one. And I think that's the forgiveness that God has for us. A forgiveness that makes us one. Nothing separates us from the love of God. And if you're a person who feels unworthy or ashamed or too afraid to ask for forgiveness, then please know that God already loves you infinitely. God has already forgiven us and constantly and consistently draws us into his presence and into his love. There's nothing you can do to attain forgiveness because you're already forgiven. There's nothing you can do to earn God's love because you are already loved. All you can do is respond. And the response is to know that you are at one with your Creator. You are blessed to be a blessing to others. Amen.